needed it to. Oh, okay, cool. We're recording. Great. So, hello. Hi, hello, and welcome to Conceptual Office Hours. Wait. Welcome back. I should have like an intro and an outro. Like, when am I ever gonna get the time? Like, or the moment? When will it be my moment again? It's always my moment. Anyways, okay. So that's my Twitter. That's there. It says it's sharing, but it's not sharing. Oh, nope. Where did it go? Go to desktop 4. Okay, Zoom. I should have okay, good, great. That's there. I'm gonna put it here. It says my screen sharing is why? Can people see my screen? Yes, okay. And it's shaking? Is it shaking? Yeah. Okay, and then we're gonna find the chat. There's the chat. Ooh, great, good. All right, so I'm gonna go through what the response forms, I'm not gonna like reveal identities or anything, but I'm gonna cover like the big things. And then from there and from like, if you guys wanna like add your input in the chat, like elaborate on stuff that you recognize that you may have said, et cetera, and then we'll get right into it. I do like have a DP problem that's like a bit different than stuff we've seen before that we can go over. But I don't know, like I see the value in working through problems, I do, but I also think like we work through a lot of problems in discussion, and like not necessarily mine, but like the other TAs do, and there's a lot of problems that get gone over in the lectures, and I also want to give the time to like actually just talk about like the concepts and the high level ideas and like, you know, how our brains should be thinking about things and like strategies like that. The other thing I wanted to say is, okay, first let's get into it. So this Conceptual Office Hours, it is October what, 14th? Feels like it's the 14th. It's the 15th? Oh shit. My bad. Or as I like to call it, co. Or as I say it in my mind, ka. Anyways, okay, so there were a lot of requests for DPs, specifically like tips to get the DP, you know, right? So that's like the big thing, DP how, right? And I think like the biggest overhead of DP problems is coming up with the recursive solution. Like that specifically was something that was mentioned. And I agree with everyone who wrote that. Anyone who wrote like getting a recursive idea really confuses me, and then that seems to be like the skeleton key to getting the DP part, because all the DP part is like, okay, now we're storing things, fun, but the recursive solution intuitively is kind of, it's hard to get there. It's a lot of practice, and then like, I don't know about all of you, but I get very intimidated by some people who like have caught on to like the intuition for DP and recursion, like the recursive solutions for the DP problems super quickly, right? Because those people exist, and like super happy for them. I am really great with graphs, not dynamic programming. I also study approximation, so things that are solvable in polynomial time aren't really that interesting to me, but like those people scare me because they kind of make me feel bad about myself for not being able to like look at a DP problem and being like, ah, yes, this is the recurrence, right? And I say this because Pooja's been studying for the our qual that I'm also supposed to be studying for, and she can come up with DP problems like or DP questions like it's no issue. And I'm like, wow, I want your brain, but I also really like mine. So that. Also, recursion is not as hard as quantum physics, even though one of your professors may have said that. But yeah, we're gonna do that. I got a question that was like, can you do a problem? Can you work through an example that like maybe combines two types of DP problems into a certain like monster of a problem? And I spent some time looking, and I got scared myself. And I also just in general I'm not good at coming up with problems because I don't have that bank of questions in my head, which is why it's all really helpful if you send me a certain problem. Because then I can evaluate whether, you know, that problem's good to go over, stuff like that, and all the stuff I said before about not wanting to just have this be a watch Tanvi work through problems thing. But we'll talk about complicated DP solutions. I just, for that person, for that request in your discussion from like the backtracking discussion. So when I hear a DP problem that uses two DP problems, I think longest alternating subsequence. Because really, a DP problem that uses two DP problems, other than like, you know, the fun leak code things, I just think it's like, oh, it's a recursive structure that uses two things to have mutual recursion. And longest alternating subsequence is the one that uses longest increasing and longest decreasing subsequence. So I would check that out. I worry about cooking up problems that are so complicated, because I think what you guys want to do is expose yourself, and this is what you want to do. I'm not saying this is what you should be doing, but I feel like a lot of you want to do is see as many scary problems as you can, so that when you get to the exam or get to a coding interview or whatever, you feel better, right? And that might, I know, that might not be the best way of doing it. I think we really need to focus on feeling comfortable with the material to the level that you can just start thinking about a problem. Even if you have no idea how to solve it, you just think about it, right? And I think there's a lot of value in studying solutions. There's also a lot of research done into this kind of like studying mechanism, like going through a worked out solution. And like I do it all the time, where like that's how I have studied. But again, it's not, in high school I used to do that to be able to like calm my anxiety about problems, so my brain doesn't go do the frozone and just pause. But it's very important to teach your brain how to try things even though you don't know where to start, right? And as much as this class is about pattern matching to things we've seen before, it is also about algorithmic thinking. So that's my take on that. Yeah. Also highly recommend, when I don't get time to like go through things here that like could be very useful for the exam, please go to the professor's office hours and please try asking them these questions. I think because those, in some sense, any office hours that happens right after the homework is due, I feel like should be used as a conceptual office hours. Not to say you shouldn't go and ask for homework questions, because you should start your homework early, but like, don't just think that because I am here at the forefront of conceptual office hours that that's your only time to ask conceptual questions. Yeah. Even feel free to ask on Piazza too, you know? And the earlier you ask in the week, the better it is. Or the fresher your question is, meaning like if we just had a lecture on something and you ask a question, that your doubt gets addressed quicker, and that's just better for you, right? So that's my thing on that. Someone also asked for divide and conquer, but I don't know like what kind of divide and conquer, so that was confusing. Someone asked something about to explore, and then mentioned how they were confused by what Sariel had said. I don't know what Sariel says because I don't look at that. So I also don't know what to explore was in response to. So if that person's here and wants to privately tell me what that's about, I'm assuming it's about like how we're starting graphs. I think we're starting graphs, or we started graphs, not sure, but that's what I feel like, because you also use the word connected component in vertex. Oh, to explore for BFS and DFS. Okay. Um, I I'm gonna put that at. So okay, I think. So has the synchronous lecture gone over graphs yet? What was today? Okay, yeah. We ended as CYK. Okay, so for CYK, really quickly, someone did ask to go through more examples of CYK, and I'm going to give a really terrible answer. I don't know that algorithm because when I got taught algorithms, wasn't really taught context-free grammars in as much detail. So something like CYK wasn't brought up. So I would do a terrible job of doing that. So I'm gonna pass. I feel like something like CYK might have like videos of dudes explaining it. So I would recommend looking at that, but I don't have a good intuition for CYK. Because I don't have a good intuition for grammars, so I apologize. Like, sad. So my plan is going to be go over DP and one example, right? That's like different-ish, like a different vibe than longest increasing subsequence or the sum stuff and all the stuff we've seen. Different vibe. Wait, okay, sub question. Yeah, type that while I go. 2, I don't know, so now I'm confused. I don't know if we should do graphs or like midterm stuff, like stuff that just happened, or graphs. I don't think Sariel's lectures went over CYK. This is today's synchronous lecture. So I get a vote for graphs. Here's my thing with, what's on your homework this week? Asks the TA that like works. The homework this week is trees and DP. And edit distance. Oh, okay. Okay. So that's why we definitely should do some DP and get some like high level strategies for how to approach DP problems. That's good, right? The reason it's not that I don't want to do graphs. I love talking about graphs. I love talking about graphs a lot. Trust me. But if graphs are going to be more of like a central theme next week, in my mind, it might make more sense to go into a lot of detail and get like a more consolidated conceptual office hours video next Thursday, you know? And by that point, I also would have like looked more at the graph stuff. Not that I can't riff on graphs, because I can, because graphs are the loves of my life, but that's that. And I also think like, you know, the midterm just happened. And I think people are very scared because they may have thought that they knew something and then like didn't. And if you don't understand the solutions, I do want you to understand the solutions. That's how you study. So are we okay with like tabling graphs for the week and focusing on this and this? Yeah, I think that makes sense too. And so this will also have some discussion of them. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds like a good plan. I'm glad. I agree. Okay. So let's do some DP. So what do we all hate about DP? I'll start. Okay. Let's do DP hate. Let's do like a burn book. Go through DP. But everything. Yeah. Number 1 is finding that recurrence. I'm asking because I want to suss out whether like we're okay with the idea of the memoization table. Okay, a lot of trouble with, okay, so finding the recurrence, I'm gonna say, is the big one, and then after that, formalizing DP,
back in Boston,
iterating. And then doing better.
She says,
okay, yeah, sure. So I'm gonna also like mention that when we did DP last Friday, I was in my 3 to 4, and then I had switched with Elliot Robson's. So he did my 4 to 5, so that video is not me, but I did his 5 to 6, and I also started ranting about capitalism. So if you want to see that for the meme, Elliot got a kick out of it. But I do go over like how to, and I'll go over it here, but I'm just saying like I do that in the context of longest increasing subsequence already there. So if that's something that you want to see done over and over again, like check those videos out. And then, is doing better always a space thing? So that's a good question. Please remind me of it as I'm doing this, because when it comes up, when I get to the doing better part, remind me. Okay, great. So why is DP hard? Well, DP is hard because people, for whatever reason, have a magic intuition about recursion, and some people don't have that. And it's not because the people that don't have that aren't as good. It's just that, at least for me, I have like a very stressful mental connotation for DP, where it's like, DP was something that I didn't get really well in the first go. So now every time I see it, my brain is like, nah, goodbye. But yeah, we've seen longest increasing subsequence, we've seen edit distance, things like that. And I said this in discussion, but like those are the very canonical problems for a DP. A lot of what happens in the homeworks gets directly taken from these like base set of problems. Longest increasing subsequence is one, edit distance is one. I would study the problem on homework 18, I believe it was, where you cut, because like that's something I've seen Jeff give in a midterm or something similar to it, right? So things like that I would study. But we want to know, what is the intuition behind getting the recurrence? Now, for the longest increasing subsequence stuff, the intuition to that, I'm pretty sure Basilis and I have gone through it in our discussions. For edit distance, I think it's a good exercise for yourself to like look at the recurrence and look at, okay, how, if I were to do this by brute force, right? The starting point, the step 0 of any attempt to anything in algorithm is, how do I do it with brute force? Why? Why do I say this? Because, look, if I can't, the point of algorithms is to get things done efficiently, right? But the point number 1 is to get things done. And so a brute force algorithm may not get things done efficiently, but it will get the task done, and that's a starting step, right? And once you have that baseline, even in my experience, writing that baseline algorithm, and this is why in your homework, like it's ordered of give like an algorithm that was actually brute force and then like generalize it to be a bit more clever. You at least have something, right? It's not a blank sheet of paper. Do we agree? Right? So the question I'm going to use to go through DP is a question called maximum size square submatrix. Okay, basically the question is the following. You're given a binary matrix, B, right? It's a 2D matrix, a matrix. Sorry, I just like, in my mind I read matrix as array. But you're given a matrix B of zeros and ones, okay? So this is, how do I want to do this? I honestly should have like copied and pasted this before, but like, contrary to popular belief, I'm not actually organized. This is so boring for me and for you, just writing these zeros and ones. But also, like, didn't this happen in one of the synchronous lectures where like the first 2 minutes of that video is just like silence and watching the crush Kanye like copy something? Anyways, okay, mood. Okay, so you're given this matrix B, and your task is find the largest square of ones. What do I mean by that? Right? What do I mean by that? I mean, well, if we look at this matrix, and we look at the ones, there are many squares that the ones form. Here, this block is a square of size 1, okay? Here is a square of size 2, right? Because it's 2 by 2, right? And then the question we want is, we want the biggest such square, right? So can someone tell me in this matrix that I've drawn here what the biggest such square is? It's 3 by 3, right? And it's this. It's this one. It's this one. Right? Cool. Great. Now, so if you were given this problem and you see it, and then raise your hand if you would get given this problem and start panicking, because same. There are many variations of these problems that are really like fun and popular. Yuyang is literally laying in bed. I'm just sorry. I just noticed. Okay. Yeah. So there are many variations of this problem where like another like variation on this is, instead of square, it would ask find the largest area rectangle of ones, right? And so look at these problems. Why, when we're given a problem like this, would we think to use DP? This is my question to you. Type in the chat, unmute your mic. Like, it's one thing to say, do this using a DP. It's a completely different thing to say, do this task, and you getting to the conclusion that DP is the way to go. And in fact, so, okay, some squares contain other squares, yes. So this element of like overlap comes in, and when we see overlapping, we're like, hey, overlapping means we might accidentally repeat computation, so might as well just store some stuff, right? Anything else? Yeah, the main thing is overlap, redundancy. I also want to point out that like, this may not look like it's something super recursive, because like, at least to me, it doesn't look that recursive, right? Or like, that's not the first thing I think about to do. But like I said before, step 0 to anything and any how to solve anything is, let's do this brute force, right? So say you had infinite computation power and infinite space, and you don't really care. What is just a way of solving this problem? What could you do? Try every single square, right? So one brute force, so this is our brute force ideas. Great. Right? Try every square. What does this mean? This means, oh, you know what I feel like such a fool, because I should have, okay. Bear with me again while I redraw this matrix. Okay. I'm so upset at myself. Okay, cool, great. Okay, and we're gonna copy this, and then we're gonna keep a copy right here, so I don't screw up. Good, okay, great. So I'm gonna say try brute force. The idea was, or for this first brute force idea, I'm gonna call it the red idea. So we're gonna do a rainbow, okay? We're gonna take this square and try everything, right? So what does this look like? Well, visually this looks like, let me try this. Okay, that's a square of size 0 because it's not 1, right? This is a square of size 1, and then we can check all the squares of size, or all the blocks, potential squares of size 1 to see if we have 1 of all ones. And we do, don't we? Right? So I do that. And then I check all squares of size 2. This becomes more complicated. This becomes a different type of red, where like this is one square of size 2, this is another square of size 2, this is another square of size 2. And I know a lot of you are going to be in the chat being like, we could probably like stop when we find a square of size 2, right? Because we know that that's the new max. And I know what we think, right? But bear with me, this is brute force. We're going to town, we're doing whatever. I'm just coloring. This is self-care. Okay. So we keep doing this, and then we can do the same thing with 3, and then eventually we'd figure out that like, hey, we do have a square of size 3, and we're good, and that's great, right? And because that's great, we do, and we try 4, right? We check if all of them are 4, and we say there's no 4, and once we hit that there's no 4, then we know that in order for a 5, I mean, look, we could keep going. This is a what, 6 by 5 array, right? A matrix. We could check all the way up to 5 by 5, right? And again, I'm pointing this out because this is a super inefficient way to do this. These are observations, and observations are your friend, right? We could go up to 5 by 5, but we notice the following: if there is no n-1 by n-1 square, there cannot be, or maybe x is better. There cannot be a x by x square. Okay, x was a terrible choice, goddamn. But I don't want to use n because n seems like, n is usually the length of something, but I just want to do, okay, a. There is no a-1 by a-1 square. There cannot be an n a by a. Honestly, m could have worked, but here we are. Okay, cool. Do we see how we got these observations? How many squares would you check worst case by doing it this way? Oh, I don't think that's irrelevant at all, right? So for a 1 by 1 square, how many squares are there in this? How many 1 by 1 squares would we check worst case? 30, right? So there would be 6 by 5, right? I actually really love this question because like this is going to give us some more information. You guys are doing the thinking. This is great. How do we count how many squares there would be in this thing, right? So we want to now count 2 by 2. That's a bit more complicated, right? How many of those squares? And I noticed how I was coloring, and if I like planned my colors better, and I would have like, we noticed that this is how those squares are looking, okay? There's a square here, there's a square here, there's a square here, etc. Right? And we keep going, and we want to ask how many spots, how many 2 by 2 squares there are. Well, in the 1 by 1 case, we know that there were 6 by 5 equals 30 squares because we knew each block itself was a square, a unique square, right? In the 2 by 2 case, we want to associate every 2 by 2 square with a unique spot, right? You can think of it as being a characteristic, like this is the representative block in this square. And me counting the number of possible representative blocks tells me the number of such squares. Does that make sense? What I just said. And like this comes up in 173 when counting, right? Because what we're doing implicitly, and like when I'm saying 173 because there's some of you who might really understand that material and feel comfortable with it. What I mean by mapping, what I'm doing is I'm mapping each 2 by 2 square to a position in the square, position in the array, right? And that I claim is a bijection, which means I just have to count the number of positions in the array that can be associated with a square, right? This is at its crux counting, which is why it's a very good question to ask. How many squares would we check? Because not only does this tell you time, right? Like we ask this question for time complexity, right? But this helps because we're thinking more modularly about this, right? What I mean by representative block is I mean for this square, right? This 2x2 square. I'm going to say its representative block is this part. Its top left corner. Oh my god, it's my mom. Hold on, kids. Hold on. Mom, can I call you back? Oh, hi. Hi, Cushy. I'm busy. No, I'm busy. I'm, okay. Okay, bye, Mom. Bye, Cushy. Oh my god. Okay. Oh, it was my mom. That was my mom. Right? So, I told you so. You know, my mom called me in the first recording video of the conceptual avocado? Anyways, also, like, if this goes longer than an hour, I'm just gonna keep going get through the midterm stuff, because I feel like the quicker, or like, the more time I take, the more confusions we associate, right? So what I meant by representative element is we're just going to pick a point that's going to be associated with the block. Now, I said top left corner. You could have just as easily decided that the bottom right corner is the representative, right? But we go back to this sub question, which is how many 2x2 blocks there were. Someone said 20, right? I'm assuming you got 20 by 5 by 4. I think that's the correct answer. Why? Well, if every 2x2 square in this array is uniquely associated with its top left corner, meaning if I picked, or that's not a good one to pick. If I picked this element as the top left corner, there's only one 2x2 square. There's no way that this can be the top left corner of other two or more 2x2 squares, right? So then we ask, how many possible top left corners could there be? Where in this array visually could we have the top left corner, right? And so this is where my copy paste array comes in. So from that, we realize, hey, this can be a top left corner, so can this, so can this, so can that. This can't, right? We do the same observation. These all can, but this cannot, right? We keep going down. None of these can. And also none of these can, right? Which means only these, right? And that's an observation. There are 5 by 4 many such blocks, which means there are 25, or they're 5 by 4 2x2 squares. A very good practice to have is being able to generalize this to arbitrary square length, right? So
Okay,
here,
I have a quick question.
yeah.
Isn't in the second row 1 1 and then the 2 underneath it, like, so for in second row the 1 in the beginning and then second 1 and then 0 1 form a square, so then that 1 on the top left would be a valid entry.
So this, you mean?
No. In the second row, in the beginning of the second row.
This?
Yeah, that box.
Yeah, so this would be counted by counting this block.
Yes.
Yeah, so what is the question?
Oh no, I thought you said that cannot be allowed.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, no, I shouldn't have drawn the line. These are all fine.
Oh, okay.
I was just
Okay,
trying to
makes
say
sense.
they're all fine. Okay, yeah, that's what that means. Okay?
Sure, makes sense. Thanks.
All right. So, we do all that. We have a good time. It's important, you know, as just CS engineers, people that like are tangentially related to mathematics, to be able to generalize this into mathematics, right? If my array was n by m, right, and I wanted to determine what are how many, you know, squares of size, like a by a are there? Well, for 1 by 1, we know that it's 6 by 5. For 2 by 2, this became 5 by 4, right? Because, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is 4. So this is 4, this is 5, right? For 3 by 3, we do the same analysis, but now 3s, let's make them pink. Where again, the representative element for a 3 by 3 block is going to be the top left corner. So how do I count them? Well, this can be a top left corner of a 3 by 3 block, right? So can this, but now this cannot be, and this could not be. right? And we do the same thing. We notice, and we keep doing this, right? And then we notice that the possible top left corners for a 3 by 3 block fall into this 4 by 3 region, okay? And so we notice this pattern and we say, oh, it seems like for arbitrary n by, I thought that that was going to move, nope. For arbitrary m by m, right? I want to count how many a by a blocks there are. It seems like this is enumerated by n minus a minus 1 by m minus a minus 1. Now, it is unclear currently to me whether we needed to actually figure out this arbitrary thing, but I think, again, it doesn't hurt to be able to practice formalizing observations like this, right? Do we all see how we got this? Because here, this is n and this is m, and here it was n minus 0, m minus 0, where a was 1. So that's what the 1 minus, yeah, okay, cool. Amazing. So we did that. This is a very good question, because this question is going to help us, or so we have this observation now, right? We also have this observation that if I didn't find an a minus 1 by a minus 1 squared, there cannot be an a by a square. Why? Why is this the case? Visually, why is this the case? We're still, yeah, we still are on the brute force part, but like, it's, look, we have the time. Can we take our time? Because time is how you build intuition, right? So, but why is it the case that, well, it's the case because if I have a 3 by 3 square, that 3 by 3 square, okay, has a 2 by 2 square in it. Also, that 3 by 3 square actually has 4 2 by 2 squares, right? It has a lot of 2 by 2 squares. In fact, it has a 2 by 2 square in it that is defined from this point. It has a 2 by 2 square in it that is defined by this point. It has a 2 by 2 square in it that's defined by this point. And it has a 2 by 2 square in it that's defined by this point. And so now we're like, whoa, that makes a 2 by 2 square, okay? Well, again, these are observations. And so the reason I show these observations is we want to do better than brute force, obviously. Another acceptable answer for brute force would be like for every, so another brute force I'm going to just mention to the side here because this also, I think, builds intuition. Another brute force way of doing this that is brute force, but not as expensive as this try everything way, right? But in my mind, actually it may not be brute force, but like still kind of is, would be to, for every possible top left corner, right? Meaning here, I'm gonna say, hey, when I fix that this square is the top left corner, what is the largest one, like size square of ones this has? The answer for this one would be 0, right? Because this itself is 0, okay? Then I ask the same thing here. When this is top left corner, what's the largest? I say 1 because it's just itself, so that's 1. Now I look at my max and I go, hey, for my max, what's the largest square I have here? The answer is 3. How do I know that? Well, I checked here and I checked here and I checked here. And that checked out. That gave me a 2 by 2 square. So I'm like, great, 2. And once I did that, if I was doing brute force, again, if I was doing brute force, then I would check this one and this one and this one, right? Like I would build these outer rings. So first I check, is this a guy a 1? Yes, okay, the answer now is at least 1 for this one corner, right? Now to check if it's 2, I check the surrounding sides. If that checks out, I know that I can keep going and keep trying to build this, right? And I would do that, okay? Again, look, we noticed that, so someone said this would be m by n times min of n comma m. Yeah, this would be polynomial, right? Because look, all we're doing is for every corner, for every block, right? When I say block, I mean like the individual spots. When I say square, I mean like the group of blocks. Okay. For every block in this brute force solution, right? I am building the largest square I can, and like storing that value, storing
ever have that feeling
the size somewhere,
sure
right?
if you're
Size
awake
in
or
like
still dreaming.
I'm gonna call it track, right? So we keep track, okay?
Time.
And the way I build this largest square is by checking for ones, and then adding a new layer, right? And by layer, I mean this L. This is so when I say layer, I'm referring to this L, okay? Right? Yeah, so it might not be exactly what you typed, I didn't verify it, but this is still faster than checking everything, right? Like checking everything takes a good deal of time. This seems a lot faster because now it's like, no, I'm checking for how many blocks are there. There are n by m blocks, right? Building the largest square. Each of these will take at most whatever. Let's assume m is the smaller one. This would take m by m checks, right? And then I'm storing all these layers, storing all of these things into track. Track itself is n by m, right? And so then I return the largest of track, right? Because the largest of track is the thing that did that. And that I can do by linearly searching. So that also takes n by m. So overall, the bulk of the computation is being done here. So that's n by m times, the min of m squared or n squared, depending on what's smaller, right? That's something like that, okay? Which is, again, faster, okay? Now, at the point I'm in my life, this would be the first brute force solution I come up with, because my brain is very conditioned to be like, okay, how do we get these representative points? What are the minimal kinds of what is the minimal sets of structures I need to check to do this? And so in my mind, I go, okay, I can think of each square as being represented by their top left corner or whatever. And then for each of those top left corners, like that gives me a for loop to start with. Then I just think about how I check things and then what I have to return, right? I think for this class, we should work to get to the fact that like this is the first thing we think of. Maybe not as fast as like I would, but like we should not freeze, right? That's my big point. We should not freeze. And we see how taking the time to actually step through what may just be the easiest brute force way actually gave us the tools needed to get here, right? And the more times you go through this motion of doing this to that on your own, not just with your handy dandy friendly TA, the better you're gonna get at getting to here, right? And so now we're getting to here and we have this observation, right? We also have this observation that we can use squares. And so this gives us the following together, and this might seem magical, but this is like, again, this is just because we're comfortable trying things and like hitting dead ends. But if I had a substructure in this array that looked like 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? So this is almost a size 3 square, right? And say the rest of the arrays, okay? And if I did this thing of like keeping track of the max, like storing the max square thing cornered at this block. So here it would be 3, this would be 2, this would be 1, this would be 1, this would be 3. But also keep in mind that track, this in blue, what I'm doing in blue, that's what track stores, okay? this would be, yeah, so like I said, this is 3, this is 2, this is 1, this is also 1, this is 1, this is 1, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 2, right? Right? So that, and we do that for everything. We notice here that, look, all these are 2s, and because this guy's a 1, okay, first, since this one is 2, I have this square. Since this one is 2, I have this square. And since that one is 2, I have this square. And because this guy is 2, so people are starting to see the subproblems. Great. Don't ruin it for people. I haven't even gotten to the part, but like, our brains are growing. This is good. This is nice. Right? So, because I have these 3 2x2 squares, this check step at 1, or this check step at this, I have apologies for the colors, guys, and all the stuff. And like, if you're colorblind, please DM me and tell me so I can keep that in mind. But honestly, I just need to get a better grasp on colors in general, because chances are there's something who's colorblind in these colors. Okay, I'll figure that out next time. But for this square, I didn't actually need to go through and build things over and over again, right? Colorblind. Okay, someone is. Yeah, so if you are, or like if I'm talking too fast or not talking loud enough, like, you should all feel free to tell me, right? And also, if I'm going off track, you should also tell me so I don't spend 30 minutes ranting at the beginning of these things. But I think, you know, it's a worthy conversation. Okay, anyways, I hope you start, the thing I'm trying to point out by like doing these things with the colors is, in this check part, right? I'm growing the square to see what the largest square that has its top left corner at this certain block is. I'm saying, okay, is this a 1? It is a 1. Let me check if these are all 1s. Great. Let me check if these are all 1s. Great. And I only stop when I get to a part where the newly added L doesn't have a 1, right? By pointing out what exactly this brute force solution is doing, right? What I'm doing is, I'm noticing that, hey, if I knew that this had a 2x2 square here, and this had a 2x2 square here, and this had a 2x2 square here, all I needed to check was whether this was a 1, right? Right? Do you all see how we're like creeping towards a DP feeling solution, right? So if the answer is no, please DM me, because I really like, I think we need to learn how to build intuition in these things, right? So I'm gonna just hold up a second and just wait if anyone has it. So I really want to make sure. While I'm waiting, I'm going to tie this brute force solution, which this was like super bad brute force, right? We went from this super bad brute force to this. Why? What was like the mind, what was the mental transition we had? We said, okay, well, we're checking a lot of squares and we're repeating. So this is what we skip, right? How did we get from this brute force solution where I check all the squares and with fixed, square time. Okay, I see people privately DM me, so I'll get to that, but let me just finish this part. For this brute force solution, what you should notice, like one of the reasons it's really badly brute force, right? Okay. I will address all the predicate. But let's look at this. The way we get from here to here, I want to also point out and break the fourth wall, because again, you're going to be doing stuff like this on your own, and I just don't want people to be stuck. Okay? So here, when we do the thing where we check all of these and we keep going, and then we check these and we keep going, what you should have noticed is, hey, if I'm checking this and then I'm checking this too, why don't I just do that all at once, right? Like together. That's just organizationally better, right? And then the whole discussion about like how many squares there are should like led us to think about, you know, oh, if I can count this number of squares like this, I can go through all the possible squares by just going through each block, like each entry in this array. Okay? And that's how we should have gone from here to here, right? Because we think about, okay, what are we doing that's extra, right? What are we not making use of computation, right? Because that's all algorithms is and data structures too. The fact that we have at our like phrases, but the fact that we can use clever data structures and can store things, not just in DP realm, but in general, right, is nice. Even things like rethinking the structure of for loops and stuff, right? So here, it was like, oh, instead of going through all the 1x1s and then the 2x2s, I just go through for each block, build it up farther. In my mind, at least, that's very much just restructuring for loops, right? So that was one thing. Some of the one question was, could I clarify where the min of n squared and m squared came from in the runtime? Okay, for this brute force solution. So in the for loop, I say we build for each block, right? For each entry of this array, I'm going to build the largest square of ones that I can find, right? Given that that square is at the left top corner is at that spot. Okay? How do we build that square? Well, I do these checks. I do all these checks. This one, and then I check all these, and then I check all these, right? And each of these checks is just checking for ones, and they're all constant time, right? And so in the worst case, right, the number of checks I do at any given part is going to be the number of checks I do in the top left corner of the largest square itself, right? So let me redraw or paste the thingy-majig at the top. Okay. So for this example that we've been working with, right? The most number of checks I do in the body of this for loop, right, happens when I place my corner here, and then I check, okay, this is a 1, great. The answer is at least 1. And then I check all of these. That's 2x2 checks. That's 2x2 checks I've just done. And I'm great, and then I keep going. That's 3x3 checks, okay? And so we don't know what the optimal size is, right? But really, the upper bound on how many checks I do at each step is the size of the biggest such square. And because we don't know what the size that is, we know that this optimal size has to be, or we know that it can't be greater than the largest square possible that can exist in here, okay? And so what I mean by when I say min of m squared n squared is I don't know if this, I don't know which dimension where this is n and this is m, right? I don't know which one is bigger, which is why I have that min. But for whatever one is smaller, say m is smaller, right? Here m is actually smaller. The largest square that can exist in this array, right, is m by m. So here m is 5. The largest possible square I could get is an m by 5 square. In fact, there are only 2 m by 5 or 5 by 5 squares, okay? And so when we're talking about runtime, and when I say, you know, I'm bounding this specific part, I say that because, I don't actually know what the optimal solution is. This is the thing I'm trying to find. I don't know what it is, but I know that I should not check more than n. Because a square that's I can't find, for instance, here, n is 6, m is 5. You can't have a 6 by 6 square in this array, okay? Anyways, that's where the min comes from. Let me know if that makes sense. And then for the other one, can you repeat what I was saying, where I had to check whether one square was a 1? Okay, well, the thing I meant by that and I'm glad it's good that we go over this, because this is like the key. This is like the skeleton key, right? Is here, if I know, and again, in blue is going to be what track does, right? So if I know that there's a 2x2 square here, meaning this is all ones, okay? And if I also know that there's a 2x2 square here, meaning it's all ones, then I also know that there's a 2x2 square here. Then, when I get to, and if I have this information privy to me before I go check for squares here, check for how big of a square here. If I knew that there's 2 here and there's 2 here and there's 2 here, then the only thing I need to do to confirm whether or not a 3x3 square exists at this point is check if this is 1. Why? Because this 2x2 square already gave me the ones here. This 2x2 square gave me these ones. This 2x2 square gave me these ones. Right? This goes back to the idea of like using things we've already solved to help us build more, right? That makes sense. Okay, good. I'm glad, right? But we should also explore the case where we encounter, so you're like, okay, this is all fine and dandy, but how do we get 3, right? Like I want to put the number 3 here. And so if we look at this scenario, right? It's not immediately clear that 3 is the right answer. Because the other thing is, if we were in this bad case, and this is where I was going with this, okay? Right? This is a just miss case. This is, hey, I had a 2x2 square here, I had a 2x2 square here, but I did not have a 2x2 square here, right? And look, I check whether this is a 1 or not, but what is the number, what is the blue number I place here? Someone tell me. 1, right? Okay, so where do I get 1 from? So in this case, whatever, again, this is a recursive rule I'm now constructing. This is how we're building off of subproblems now. Because look, what we just did is we figured out what the subproblem should be. Now we're figuring out how to get from one subproblem to the other. And we're going through all these examples, right? And like, really hope with your group members early in the week, if you start approaching problems like this, like I truly believe you'll get farther. I'm not saying like you'll get the answer magically. I don't know how your brain works, but I think you'll get farther by doing stuff like this, right? So here, we notice that this is 1, and we're like, oh, bump, right? Right off the bat, we should notice that when this is 1, or when this entry is 1, I'm adding a 1, right? Like I'm adding a 1 to something, I don't know what it is, but that square itself gives me a 1x1 square, which, depending on what's around it, adds another layer, right? So that comes from there. If that's confusing, we'll work through more possible cases, and hopefully it'll be clear. I think once we get the recurrence, it'll be clear. So then, if I had another near miss, right? And I think, this idea of near miss cases when building recursive things is really good. I think those are like the examples that give you the most intuition. Things where like, this could almost be a really good answer, right? Or like the max answer. Or here, this could almost have been a 3x3 square, but it wasn't, right? I think those are really good. I mean, that's just idea, right? So if I do the same thing here and I check again, this like the golden L, right? Golden L. Anyways, okay. So this is a 2x2 square, right? This is a 2x2 square. This is not a 2x2 square, right? And this again is 1. Okay, that's one example. That's not the example you want. The near miss, that's not the example I meant to write, because that example is very similar to the other one. What I meant to say is this. Okay, yeah. So now we do the same thing. this is 2 by 2. This is not a 2 by 2. So this is actually only a 1, right? Because it's just this 1. And then this anchors a 2 by 2. What is the top? What is this? What's the blue number? Here. 2, right? Cool. Interesting. Great. So here we only had 1. Here we only had 1. Here we have 2. And notice how all of these are like, none of these are 0, right? We only ever seem to get a 1 when there's a 1 here, first of all, and one of these things is 0, right? And then in our really nice happy case, we got the 3 because everything here was 2, okay? So I'm gonna write down what the recurrence is. I'm gonna write down what the recurrence is. And we're gonna, I don't know why I repeated myself, but we're gonna figure out, you know, how we got there. So recurrences, or the subproblem, I should say, for m of, okay, or max square, I'm gonna call it max square, of I comma j denotes the size of the largest square whose top left corner is at position I comma j, right? Just for implementation's sake, say the array that I'm talking about, what do I call it? I call it V, right? Let's just say V is a global variable, and so we have access to it, right? And so when we talk about max square, we're talking about max square of V, that's just, I'm an algorithmist here, so I don't care about computers. But yeah, it's going to be, so if, first of all, if V of I comma j is 0, what will this entry be? What is the maximum square that can happen? Maximum square of 1s, that's what the problem is. I know we've like done a lot of stuff, so we might have forgotten what we're going for. So yes, the people who said 0, yes, right? Because if that entry is a 0, I can't build around it, right? This is one of my base cases. This is one of my easy throwaway cases, right? Good. Now the otherwise case is if B of ij equals 1, and that's another thing when I study, anytime there's an otherwise case, I like to translate what that case actually means, because I sometimes think that seeing it written out gives you more bits of information about like what's actually going on. Okay. If that number is a 1, then before we do anything, what are the blocks? What are the subproblems? I don't care about what the relationship is, what we're adding. What are the subproblems that I'm looking at the very least? And remember, subproblems are just this max square guy. Which max squares come into the picture when trying to figure out max square of I comma j? The 3 neighbors of I and j. Yeah. And the 3 neighbors of I and j, I'm going to abbreviate max squared to ms, right? Okay. And so what are the 3 neighbors of I and j? A pool is written in the chat, right? And a bunch of people DM'd me in the chat. Good. So I plus 1, j, yes, great. And then we have what? I comma j plus 1. And then we have I plus 1, comma j plus 1. Right? Cool. Great. We have these 3. We now need to figure out how to tie them in and how to figure out whether, you know, we're adding one or subtracting one. When I'm in the case of B comma ij, or B of ij being 1, I know for a fact that I at least have a square of size 1, right? Because that square is Bij itself. So I'm going to add a 1, okay? Now, the other reason we add a 1 and the reason we add is because none of these squares, none of these overlap with B of I comma j, right? So we're not overcounting. That's another like just like trick from GP. Figure out if you're overcounting things, because like that's the weird thing with recursion is like things are being added at different recursive steps, and it's very difficult to visualize, especially for like 2D recursive problems. It's very difficult to visualize like where the ones get accumulated almost. And this university doesn't have functional programming classes where you can learn really beautiful like tricks and intuition about recursion, but that's one thing. But again, I'm just like, and everything that pops up into my head I'm saying out loud clearly. But if you notice from all these cases that I've drawn at different places in the thingy-mabob, right? This number that gets put there when the entry is a 1 is always 1 greater than the smallest number around it, right? Let's verify this. It's an observation. Again, I'm saying this nonchalantly because like I figured out the answer before, right? But if you're going through these things, we really need to get back into that like high school mentality, almost not about grades, but about how we look at things and find a pattern and like try it, right? We really need to do that. And I think that like we worry that, oh, it has to be like I have to be more clever. The root of every clever thing is a lot of observations, right? It's just that if you've done this for a while, the observations go very quickly. And if you're ignorant to how your brain works, you don't necessarily know how to explain the observations better. Also, it takes a very long time, right? Like this is the only reason, you know, we can't do this much detail in discussion or recitation is because it takes a lot of time, which is why, you know, we do this on our own. We do this here, etc., etc. Anyways, let's test this hypothesis, or that's at least what I've noticed here. I've concluded that I have to add a 1, and it seems like if I add a 1, I want to take this value 0, right? Because I don't need any more value. Well, here, same thing. I add a 1, I should probably take this value. Wonderful. Here, I added a 1, right? But the answer is 2, which means, I added my 1 to probably this 1. Okay? And then we go to like this opt scenario, the best one, the best scenario. I add a 1. I've stated that I needed to add this 1 because this guy is a 1. But now this answer is 3. All of these are 2. So I add 1 to 2. So we see this pattern. We notice, I'm probably adding it to the minimum square size amongst these 3. Right? What do I mean by this? I mean, I'm adding 1 plus the minimum over this, right? Now again, break the fourth wall. This may be confusing because our problem, if we recall, is maximizing the size or finding the maximum size square, yes? So then it's like, why is there a minimum here? Well, we need the minimum because the minimum you can think of is the restricting this, or okay, when I say minimum, I mean the smallest square that exists in this L, this golden L, right? Like this, or these rings that where did I draw? Where are you? But like I'm saying, the substructure we're primarily working with, right? The smallest square is the thing that limits the size of what square can be here, right? So this had a square of size 1. That means either here or here there's a 0, which means if I tried building outwards, I'd get stuck, right? So it's very, this kind of limiting factor comes up a lot. It's come up a lot in things you've seen. It just gets translated into the problem differently. So longest increasing subsequence, the limiting factor was, can I pick this new element to add to my subsequence? Yes or no? The case where there's no, you can't pick it because you're assuming that like element A of I, the thing you saw right before, that might be bigger than the new element you're considering. If you don't get what I'm saying, watch the longest increasing subsequence discussions. But again, this idea of a limiting factor comes in, and if you can name it, you have, unearthed one dimension of this recurrence, right? Namely, how it does the recurrence, right? And so this is our recurrence. All of that bandwidth, or all of that work, all of these observations have culminated into this. Now, someone pulled this out of their ass without doing that. Well, like, good for them. Like, I secretly hate them, but like, good for them. Someone says seem very different, similar to the edit distance DP. Again, like, I think all of these have, like, at a very, very high level, same idea. But when we're not comfortable enough to unearth the details of each idea, then we don't have an understanding of the high level idea, right? So we only see this. If you do see a parallel to edit distance, which I don't know the edit distance algorithm off the top of my head, so I don't want to talk about it. But if you do, again, what are you doing? You're building intuition. Okay. One question. What about if I and j are larger than the bounds of the matrix? Should that be a base case? It should be. You're right. LOL. So, so if I is greater than n or j is greater than m, we'd add it would be 0, right? Because we can't count it, right? That is a base case. It's not already covered. Because right now, what this is a backtracking algorithm. Right? This is just a recursive algorithm. We haven't even started talking about GP. Right? Any other questions about this recurrence and how we got it? Are we comfortable with how we got it? That make more sense? Does this not seem mathematical to me before? Now comes the not as painful part, which is making the DP solution. So someone had asked, I think, but they honestly couldn't. You just went really long from how we get it to focus. Okay. We did it because it's good for us and good for our learning. I love how this says DP. Anyway, so for the DP part, I always think the DP part, the memoization part, is like finding it. I don't know if Andrew went over, or Sariel, or I know Jeff's notes might have this idea of bottom up and top down. I'm gonna be real with you. I don't know what the difference is. I don't know which one goes in which direction, because in my mind, they both go up and down, and then I also, like, I'm the kind of person that, like, really needs to think about which way is right and which way is left. That is not something that is real to me. Then I do the thing with the L's. Which way does an L face? And then I forget how L's are written. And I don't know what's up with that, but, like, I'm not going to get into that. I do not know. I will confuse you more. But to figure out how to turn a recursive solution into an iterative way of figuring DP, first, the most, I don't want to say brain dead, but like a very clear translation to a memoization table is, okay, this makes recursive calls with 2 parameters. I probably want to store the values with those 2 parameters. In fact, the way I've been drawing things, the blue, those blue numbers track, like I mentioned before, that's really just our DP. That's our memoization table, right? I'm going to call this table track, right? And it's going to be n rows and m columns, just like the thing before, right? And so we already know that so here's what I think about when I think about how to fill up this table. Okay, all right. Bye. So back to leave, but this recording will be up, so we'll get to the stuff. Thank you for those who are bearing with me, and also again apologies for spending 30 minutes waxing. But yeah, okay. So when I think about how to fill in a DP table, I think about where are the, like, what are the spots that I don't even have to think about filling in, right? And this goes back to our discussion of this beautiful thing, namely the person that asked how many squares are in the thingamabob, right? And then we had this discussion of like getting the top left, and that whole top left thing really did help us, right? But it also helps us because what did we notice? We noticed that this outer ring, it's not that they can't be top left corners, but it's just that the largest top left corner they can of a square, like the largest sized square that these guys can be a top left corner of, they are the size one, right? So the max number that gets stored in this part is 1, right? Why? All you have to do when you do this, and okay, why is that? That is because in this recursive structure thingamabob, none of these elements have the golden arrow. I love how I've dubbed it the golden arrow. Anyways. Do we see that? Yeah. So to me, this is very similar to how in induction, when you have an induction that makes more than one recursive call, and if you've ever been taught induction by me, right, or seen me explain it, I always say in strong induction, when you make 2 or more calls to your induction hypothesis, really what that is just recursion, right? Like, this is why I disagree that recursion is not as complicated as, quantum physics. But recursion and induction are very similar. And so when I teach induction, I always say you need to make sure that you can use your base cases cover the things that you can't use the induction step on, right? And this is that, right? These blocks, I can't make that recursive call on. They don't have the golden out. They don't have access to all 3. And I don't want to make an index out of bounds access, right? Like, that's it. So probably first step 1 of filling this DP table is probably filling out the outer ring, right? I'm not gonna write the code. I think like every one of us should be capable of writing the pseudocode, but I'm going to answer the question of how do we figure out what order to do it in, right? So step 1 is figuring out the base case, right? Amazing. Then, and I did a very similar thing for longest increasing subsequence in discussion, where it was like, okay, to fill out an arbitrary block, ij, right? Which blocks do I need? Well, I need the golden A, like literally, right? So for this, I need the value from here, I need the value from here, and I need the value from here, right? And in order to make use of DP the way it should be, meaning the only way I'm going to avoid having to compute things over and over again is if I fill in this table in a specific order, right? That order allows me to have these accesses be constant time, right? So we're like, okay, great. Now, given that we've already hypothetically filled out this outer ring, what is the first square I should be able to fill out? And again, we're taking things slow, right? We're thinking about this very, very iterative, right? Bottom right, right? This is the first thing I can fill with a recursive step. Great, okay? Now I'm gonna fill it. Wonderful. From here, what's the next thing we can do? The thing right above it, right? It has a golden. Now, we could have also done it this way, actually, if we notice. We could have, right? But let's just assume we're picking one direction. Let's pick one direction. Zayn Malik having a baby and like Zayn Malik being the love of my like adolescent life. That was weird. Nick Jonas marrying Priyanka Chopra. Just absolute mindfuck. This is me blowing off steam, but like imagine being like an Indian American bi woman and having like one of your childhood crushes from Bollywood marry one of your childhood crushes from Hollywood, and you being like, what? Anyways, okay. So people who said you can go up or left. When you do this on your own, pick a direction to go into, right? Pick a direction to decide, because what you've just observed is that there are multiple configurations of for loops that you could have for the DP solution, right? But I'm gonna say we go up. So this is how if my algorithm was running, I didn't write it, but if I had a for loop, it probably should go up like this, and then it would do this, right? Because those are the next L's. Those are the next things that'll have golden L's, and it keeps going, right? Right? Okay, cool. And so if you notice this, you notice that, look, the way this is going is it goes from bottom to top, and then it's going from right to left. Bye to the person that just messaged me. Okay, right? Yes? Good. Now, we could have definitely done it this way, right? And if we did it this way, let's do it in red, right? If I tried my other solution, and for just a hot minute, ignore what I've drawn. But if we started here and then decided to do this way, right? The next row would be here, the next row would be here, and the next row would be here. But you notice how that too is going from right to left and bottom to top, right? But in one, you add rows. So in the red one, we're adding rows. And in the pink one, we're adding columns. And you can do either or, and they should work, right? Which is really fun. And so now we know what our table would look like. We know what our the order should look like. And this is enough information for you to be able to come up with for loop. I'm not gonna write it down because I feel like I'd mess it up and I don't want to, and I also want to leave things for people to do on their own, right? Some other things. I think a very good exercise to do in follow-up of this to like solidify your understanding. Maybe you take this to your group members and explain it because you're studying together, whatever it may be. We chose, so you could potentially combine the base case and the recursive case, do them together instead of separate. You could. I like to keep them separate just because, like, I don't know. In my mind, it's easier to debug. You know, if I kept the base case separate from the recursive case. Because in algorithms land, like in software engineering land, having code that takes up less lines is probably better. But in algorithms land, having things that are very easy to analyze and like modularizing your algorithms is a lot better. So like, for example, where is it? So this is what I'm saying, I did this for longest increasing subsequence. And when I did it, I actually wrote the code, right? And so you should do this part for the question we were just talking about for yourself. But you could, in all, be very like efficient and like have a case in the for loop that takes care of the base cases so that you don't have to handle it separately. But then you wouldn't have this like one-to-one correspondence almost between your recursive case and your code. And I personally really like that. From an analysis point of view, as an algorithms person, I like that. But as a software engineer, they're like, let's all be tricky. And see, software engineers are tricky and algorithms people are clever. That's the difference. So that's what Yeah. So it's hard to think about what the best runtime we could do it. So let me just a couple words or like a little spiel, so to speak, on how to know if we're doing as best we can. So for questions like longest increasing subsequence, the solution you start with, or the solution that should have been presented to you first, is the n squared solution, right? And then you get told, look, we can do this in n log n. Why? Well, we can reduce our DP table to a 1D array, and then filling each entry of that array takes log n time. I don't off the top of my head know the n log n solution for the table. But for the DP problems that were done in discussion yesterday about like the two white dudes sledding because they don't have to think about like the world, the solution in the discussion solutions gives you the best solution up front. It does not go through the motions of getting a slow solution and building a faster one from it. I, however, did do that from 4 to 5 p.m. because I figured out how to do that in 3 to 4 p.m., which, you know, I get really proud of myself because I'm like, wow, my brain is actually working sometimes. Because, like, I think back to, like, when I was 19, I was like, I would never be able to, like, come up with stuff like this on the spot. So I get very happy. Anyways, the way to sort of figure out if you're doing too much or storing too much is like by, you know, taking an audit of what your algorithms currently do, right? And like, what do I mean by that? I mean, well, when we constructed DFAs, we could come up with DFAs where like it has a lot of states and then make clever observations of, hey, actually, we don't need to store this much information. We only need to store some minimal amount of it. But you don't get that right off the bat, right? Like, especially if you're learning stuff like this for the first time, you get that after writing a solution that maybe uses more information than necessary, and then doing and saying, okay, we don't need this. On your homework, for question 16, right? That question is literally verbatim longest increasing subsequence, but instead of numbers and increasing, it's like, it's moves, right? Like they had moves and stuff like that. And so if you were doing that, if I was a student in this course doing that problem, I would try to pattern match it as closely as possible to longest increasing subsequence, which means I would have an n by n DP table, and I would literally store the same kind of information as longest increasing subsequence is doing and go from there. Now, in that problem, the optimal solution, the DP table it uses is 5 by n, right? Meaning it's not n by n. So it goes from being quadratic to being something that is like linear, like a linear size. It's not one array, it's 5 arrays, but it's still an array instead of like a 2D array. How did they get that? Well, they noticed that while in longest increasing subsequence, having to store things for every index was because you don't know what numbers exist in those indices, right? But in this problem 16, you notice that, hey, the only things that I'm like looking at are moves, right? And there were what, 5 moves? And so it wasn't like, oh, I needed to store the last I that I saw, index I that I saw. All I needed to do was store the last move I saw. And there were only 5 moves instead of I possible last things, right? Like, look, those I moves, or those 5 moves could have been at those indices, but we didn't really care about the indices as much as we cared about what that previous move was, right? In fact, the same thing is true in longest increasing subsequence, right? On a very high level, we didn't really care about I. We just needed to store I because we needed to make that access into the array A to be able to do the check to define which cases. So what was the best runtime for 16? I think it was like n squared, like 5n squared. Or actually, I'm not sure. I think it was 5n. Oh shit, I should know. Doesn't matter, I don't care. But like, that's one way of, yeah, I think it's linear because you get 5n and each of the spots took constant time to fill, right? Now, there are ways to make DP tables faster, not only by improving the amount of space you store, but also from like just doing things more cleverly. So I highly recommend looking at my discussion from 4 to 5 p.m. Yesterday, because like I go through the motions of showing you how we got from 2D to 1D, and also how we got this log n thing, right? Because I mentioned that to go from 2D to 1D, we could still have a solution that takes O of n squared times in 1D, but we should notice that because we have certain arrays that are sorted, we can use binary search, and then we get that like this helper routine is just binary search, and that's where the log comes from. So it's tricks like that. It's observations like, hey, the thing I'm searching for the next thing, and again, this will make sense if you watch that video, that's actually a sorted array. And because I know it's sorted, then I can do a log n. I think the clever solution for longest increasing subsequence does some kind of pre-processing that sorts something and then does binary calls. And because sorting an n length array is log n log n, and then if you have an n length array where you're making log n, like filling each spot takes log n, like I think that's what ends up happening. And because the pre-processing takes just as much time as the DP algorithm itself, you can afford to do the pre-processing, you know? This is just 2n. Right. Yeah, so that is what that is. I'm not gonna look into it because like I don't. And yeah. No, now that I don't care, I just but that's it for DP. I hope that helped. We're gonna do midterm stuff. I'm gonna try and like cap this at 9:30, right? Because I'm not gonna like walk us through the midterm things, but I'm gonna like hopefully address some questions, and then we'll be good. And then that'll mean I spent 2 hours to put that. But honestly, if this whole ordeal makes people feel better about DP, then I wish someone did this for me. And you guys should all like become really nice CAs and help out the kids in the city. Like ever. But just don't be a dick. Not that bro, IDK private CA discourse? Yeah. I highly recommend just like being a CA or TA because I think it's like really fun. And I think if you're like a nice person, you're doing a lot of good for your community. You know? But maybe not. Alright. It's okay. I'm not allowed to TA 374 next semester. So I'm not allowed to TA next semester. My advisor was like, stop. And I was like, oh. I find TAing very calming, you know, when I'm not getting mad at everything. Like this act of going through information that you already have familiarity with really does like ground you.
Yeah.
Also, like I when I say that like dumb questions help me build intuition, like that's the truth, right? Like every semester I TA, I learn more about the because I get asked, which is nice. I like it. Very good. It's very good. You can feel the grooves. Okay, so I'm. Where are the midterm solutions? I don't know what
light incense when I write, cause I know the feeling. On the cold day, I like the feeling. The crisp air breathing, blending well with a spicy smell. I'm meditating, please lock the cell. I won't step out for a while now. Like Michael Jackson when he's learning a new dance style. You can't bring it out, it's cold. I harness the memory of many Christmases. Success is on the wishing list. We can't go back. We've come so far. The world is ours. We all have a heart. We can't go back.
It's not.
We've come so far.
Sound. Okay, so let me just
The time's ticking on the clock.
Someone
We all
asked about
trying to get up
homework
out of this
14.
place. I wanna
I'm
take my
gonna
wish and
differ
list
on
and
that
fade
one because I
to the
didn't.
clouds where everything
I
is
like
okay. We
pawned
all
off my
trying to
office
be
hours
somebody, dream of
that week
somebody.
to
I
cover
need to dream
someone's
of myself, more
discussion. So I
visualize
have
the name
no
I'm
idea
using
what
a
went
pen
on
more.
for questions
Lazy
what
MCs and not
15,
buttoning a
14, or
pencil.
13.
Yeah, this world could be great.
That's my idea of
I'm just
self-care.
blocked by the
So
mental. I
I'm
need
not the
to
best
invest
person
in
to ask.
myself more to be
If there are TA
successful.
office
Yeah,
hours
we're
tomorrow,
born
which
free,
I
but
believe
still
there
in
are,
debt to the machine
right?
give it breakthrough. We need a breakthrough. Rappers be
check
talking
there
to
are.
see through. We're all people, and people
should
have
go and
fears and
ask
makes us grow. That's what I
them.
think. So let yourself go here. I'm trying to let myself go. So you
So,
hear me at my
maybe-
best. I'm not letting fears take over my head. Yeah.
There were other people that asked about the midterm. That asked actually. So I got same questions about. So I got I got multiple people asking about 1B and 4, right? So I want to at least talk about them briefly, because if I can't go through them with you, it can at least point you in like a somewhat decent direction, right? Also let me talk about. Yeah, Emerson has office hours and Jenya has. So feel free to go to them tomorrow to ask about the homework. I think they do a really good job of explaining the questions better than me. I hate homework office hours. I'm much better at like intuition building than I am at figuring out homework things or like debugging your homework. You know what I mean? Okay, so for 1B, for midterm stuff, just briefly. I don't know why I put that in quotes, but for 1B, what was 1B? Prove that for any translator, the language it generates is regular, right? Oh god, what's a translator? Oh no, I have to read it. So a translator is a DFA modified such that each transition it performs outputs a single letter or an epsilon. Okay, so it like writes to a tape, so it's somewhere in between. It doesn't write to a tape, it just writes an output, so it's somewhere in between a DFA and a Turing machine. This is just me thinking out loud, right? A translator generates a word if there exists a string such that if we run T on it, it outputs W. And it arrives to an acceptance state. So, no problem, kids. And it arrives at acceptance state. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is, yeah, okay, I intuitively understand. Amazing. It outputs, oh, you know what I want to cover? Because someone asked, was what is the difference? This is good that I didn't remind me, because I stared right at that sentence and then it said something. But the difference between undecidability, or not undecidability, my bad. Recognizing and deciding, right? So deciding is stronger. No. So I don't want to write greater than equal, but so there's this concept of a Turing machine recognizing a language and a Turing machine deciding a language. And the difference is that with Turing machines, we have this idea of, where you get this idea of like halting, right? Like this concept that, hey, because I'm reading and writing, and because I have the ability to move left and right, I don't know if I will ever finish evaluating the thing in the Turing machine. We don't have this problem with DFAs. Why? DFAs always move one letter at a time, and you know that the strings it's inputting are finite, unless you're like me and you're very into like pure set theory and infinite length games, which if I had my way, I'd be in Europe getting PhD in then, but just like, you know what I really want to do in my life is write really beautiful textbooks. Then I get really scared about how people would use those textbooks and like screw it up. And then like the fairness and algorithm design thing freaks me out, so that's why I'm here. But the reason this becomes a thing in Turing machines, and this distinction occurs at the Turing machine level and not the DFA level, is because Turing machines are where we don't get a sense of whether something will stop computing, right? Meaning we don't know, even if the string I give you, even if that tape may be infinite, but the thing written on that tape could be finite, there's no guarantee that a Turing machine will halt on that. Okay? So when we say a Turing machine decides a language, it means for every string in that language, the Turing machine halts in an accept state on that language. And for every string that it doesn't accept, right, that does not belong in the language, the Turing machine rejects. Like it stops and it rejects, right? And so this deciding means that every input like gives me a decision. Okay? In recognizing, the distinction is that for all X in the language, the Turing machine will accept X. And then for all other X, in like sigma star minus the language, right? That TM will either reject or hang. What do I mean by hang? I mean it goes for infinity, which means it's not saying no, but it's just not saying yes. And it's a very weird distinction to make, but it, like, this idea of finiteness and infiniteness comes into play. And so being able to recognize a language is useful, but it gets tricky if we know, you know, what the elements of the language are. But the distinction between deciding and recognizing is that in deciding, we don't have this either. We have just this part, okay? So that's the difference. I don't know any visual cues for it other than that deciding is just a decision gets made every time, like a concrete decision. In recognizing, it's like, look, if you are in, you're in. But if you're not in, I might not tell you you're not in either. I just might, like, ghost you, leave you hanging. I like ghost you. Me, the queen of ghosting. For the person, I think the person that asked that question is still here. I hope that makes sense. But, okay, so for the midterm, this translator, okay, as it's reading a word, basically what it's doing is it's writing another word, right? And that's why it's called a translator, great. And then they do this thing with the DFA. And then, to show that to show that the language it generates is regular, right? The way you go about doing it is you construct an NFA that accepts the language, right? Accepts the language that this translator is outputting, right? Which is a weird, funky thing. And I'm sure when you're on an exam, you probably just like freak the fuck out, which is fine. It's understandable. Okay? But I don't want to do this. Basically, the NFA on a very, very high level creates a state for uses the states of the translator and then incorporates the things that it's outputting into, right? So like you're already given this DFA, right? Or this translator is a DFA. It's just a DFA that like gives a bit of information. Great. Now we're gonna take this baseline DFA part of this translator and turn it into an NFA using the characters that are being output. That's on a very high level what it's doing. I would go about going through the motions. Like I can feel my brain running out of energy, but that's intuitively what happens. And then you're like, oh, why do we need an NFA? Well, or like, why are we making an NFA? Well, even though the base of the translator is a DFA, when we start adding these more things, like these things, we don't want to worry about keeping transitions kosher or not. By kosher, I just mean like we don't want to worry about. I Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna stop sharing this, and I'm going to start sharing this desktop one. Yeah. You can see my desktop and me scrolling. Yeah. Okay, great. So, yeah. So this line that's like, this is why we need to use an NFA here, and a DFA would not work, right? It's because we need multiple of these transitions. And what's this whole 1-0 deal? The idea is to reuse the same states as t, but for each state t and a symbol O in t, we add a transition for any input symbol I that would produce O as output, right? So anytime in my translator I read an I that gives me an O, I add that transition, or at least like use that transition in my NFA. Why? Because now I want to bake into this DFA this language, right? And intuitively, it should make sense why we used this. I keep saying intuitively, but when you're on a test, when we give you something like this, we want you to build off what you're given, right? I think if you're very stressed, you may not have realized that, like, oh, at its core, this is a DFA, and if that DFA itself is constructing G, then it should be able to figure that out. And then that's where the wiring comes from. The proof part, this proof part, I don't know what the rubric was like, but I feel like we definitely did not expect like this full detailed proof, okay? I think I'm gonna defer on this question because I didn't really look on it beforehand, so I don't have like a good way of like how we could have gotten this during a test. So please go to Friday office hours for that. I'm gonna pause sharing so I can look at what other things are asking. Yeah, so the person that asked me for the explanation of the transition function, I'm gonna pass on that because I think my brain is like, you don't want to read now, and I'm like, that's okay. Yeah, and so 1B, the formal proof, I wouldn't worry about the formal proof. How many times have we given you a formal proof? I think at the and I don't recall what the rubric was like for them. Okay, so where is language of n created? Is that just the language created by the DFA? Yeah, so in that solution, the first part, right before it says claim 0.1, that part's saying, hey, we're going to take the state, and I like to think the states as like the board game, like the actual parts of the DFA, and then the transition function is how they're wired, right? And so up until that point, they're describing what the NFA is, and that NFA is called N, and so language of N, right, that you analyze by analyzing how you've created the DFA, and namely how you've done the wiring, right? And so by showing that the language of N is a subset of G of T, and then vice versa, so this and this, you're showing that they're the same thing, which means that the NFA decides G of T. That's what that was about. The other question was about 4. Specifically, that in the reduction solution, there's no reference to at least 5 string. Okay, alright, so, here's where I goofed as a TA, in my mind, just, as a TA. So, I'm gonna resume here. The reason I goofed as a TA is because I gave a lot of really good undecidability explanations and then did not record them, and then one time a student you know, did the right thing and recorded me while I was just doing that until like towards the end I got into a very ranty mood, and then like I didn't say things I shouldn't have said, but like I wasn't as nice about some things as I should have been. And that's on YouTube. I'm gonna see if I can ask that student that did that to edit out the last bit, and then that will be a good YouTube video explaining the intuition behind undecidability, because I really wish I had recorded it at those conceptual office hours and then in my 2 discussions, but like, I don't know, some days you don't want to hit record. I actually genuinely forgot the first time and then was angry in the second hour. Those poor second hour kids, like they get the best explanations, but they also get really angry, Tanvi, because like I just think about things. So in this decider, so one question was, look, there's no mention of at least 5 strings, and I hate this solution. Why do I hate it? Well, because this part, right, should probably have had to do with M rejects at least 5 strings that contain the substring cat, but accepts at least 5 strings that contain the substring dog, right? And then for whatever reason, you have this X thing, and so you say, let's be something be the prefix of the first 3 characters of X. Right? So this just means that whatever X was, yeah, I feel like this is not, it's sad and implicit. Do you wanna elaborate? What does return true mean as opposed to accept and reject? Return true just means accept. So return true means that M prime has accepted the Turing machine, the language X. Are you kidding me? I'm so mad. I'm so mad that that's how that solution is. Oh, that pisses me off so much. Why not just check if X was what? That's idiotic. That's ridiculous. See, this is just a case like this where I should have stopped pressing her. Okay. I don't know if the person... Oh my God.
Don't you fear?
I'm being recorded, so like, let me just go through it. That solution, okay, like Alexander has pointed out in the chat, that solution, basically the way it works is the whole let X be the first 3 characters prefix of X, right? That's basically checking that whether or not X is a string that's like dog, etc., or cat, etc., right? And it says that if the first 3 characters are dog, etc., or if the first 3 characters are dog, that means any string X that is like dog 1 or dog 2 or dog 3 or dog 4 or dog 5 or dog like 97, right? Like those strings will get accepted, which means at the very least 5 of them will get accepted. It's also saying that at least 5 substrings, 5 strings where cat is a substring will get rejected. Namely, all substrings where the prefix or like the first 3 characters are CAT, they will all get rejected. And for all the ones where the first 3 characters are DOG, they'll all get accepted, right? Which is cool, which is clever. Haha, we're being slick. But you could have done this by saying, like, having like a big if statement, right? And saying if X is dog 1, accept. If X is dog 2, accept. If X is dog 3, accept, etc. through 5. You could have done another 5 if statements for if X is cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, reject. And then if you just have else, you can either choose to accept all of them or reject all of them. It doesn't even matter, right? All that matters is that you've hit the 3 dog things to accept, or the 5 dog things to accept, or reject the 5 cat strings. That's it. But that's
You know what I want on my tombstone?
Fine.
My sister has this in her notes, because in case I can't tell anyone after I die. On my tombstone, a quote from Horace Mann.
And so someone asked, is return true necessary? It seems like dead code. It is necessary, because if you have an X that doesn't have dog or cat, say my X was fish, say my string was fish, you would get past the 2 if statements, and then you would still have to decide, right? Is regrades still open? Regrades are still open. Regrades are still open till noon tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna stop recording now because I think I've run the course of useful things to say. If you are watching this video and you got through, can I quickly go over CNF? I mean Chomsky normal form. I have no idea how to convert things. Oh, like what is it? Oh, Chomsky normal form is just this idea of. Can we see my iPad? Am I sharing my iPad screen? That's the desktop. Oh shit. And here I was writing on my iPad thinking, God damn it, Tanvi. Okay, good. Chomsky normal form is just like, hey, for CNFs, not CNFs, what am I saying? Also, CNF also is a conjunctive normal form, anyways. But in a context-free grammar, we can have rules that look like this, right? Like S is 0, 1, 1, or 0A, 1, 1, 0, or things, and they're complicated, right? Chomsky normal form basically is a context-free grammar where all of the rules are of 1 or 2 types. We either have rules of the form A goes to some like terminal, or we have A goes to the concatenation of 2 non-terminals. So all of your rule types look like this. Why is this useful? Why is this helpful? Because if you're looking at the recursive, or if you're looking at the reverse thingy-bob, right? It's very easy to state what the reverse of these rules are, right? The reverse of this rule would just be A of C, and the reverse of this rule would be A goes to CB. So Chomsky normal form is just good because you can generalize all the rules to these 2 things, whereas in not Chomsky normal form, you may have complicated structures. And it's not that we don't like complicated structures. It's just that when we do CNF transformations going from one thing to the other, if I know, it's easy for me to write the proof. You know? So that's all that is. And so the CNY, CYN, whatever, you wouldn't reverse the transformation, just the order of the result. Yes. So that's why for that question, if you just wrote reverse, you didn't get much more than like the bare minimum amount of points you would do. Because, like, if by reverse you meant this, that doesn't make sense. But yeah. So yeah, the DP algorithm of turning a normal context-free grammar into one in Chomsky normal form. Like I would know it. I think it's like a DP algorithm that like doesn't hurt to know. I don't know. I'm also unsure if like these kind of Frankenstein problems will come up, because I was told by a CA that like a homework problem a homework problem on last semester's homework 7 was a DP having to do with DFAs, which, look, at the end of the day, I don't think stuff like that's too bad, but I think if you read DP and then just absolutely segfault when you read DFA and segfault on an exam, if you're like given something like that, that's the only trouble. But if you're like comfortable enough with like making these observations and like making progress, you'll be fine. Oh, you just needed to clear that up for the first one. Okay, that's okay. Now I'm going to stop recording. What I meant to say for anyone watching this that made it all the way to the end, kudos to you. Really hope you went on like 2 times the speed. If I didn't get to your question, feel free to go to office hours if you can on Friday. Feel free to ask those questions on Piazza. There are TAs looking at Piazza. The professors are kind of looking at Piazza. Please make an effort to get your questions answered. I'm sorry that I'm not able to answer all of them here, but yeah, so I'm going to stop